Well, some days are just plain frustrating. So, set out to do more brush hogging with the tractor and promptly destroyed it. So, the other day I mentioned briefly rednecks running it into stuff, and well, now I am one of them. I ran this into a discarded piece of equipment that we had laying around, and I just barely popped the clutch and it went right into it. Flattened this out, denned it really bad, crushed this back in. I went to the trouble a couple of years ago of smoothing that out, straightening that all out. Now it's bent again. So the front end's messed up. What else did we accomplish? Well, we managed to pop the radiator cap off that came with this radiator, so I stole the one off the old radiator, but I'm starting to question the quality of this radiator. It runs hot, and the other thing is, barely brushing it, and you see that radiator cap is now leaning back like this. This is very easy to bend. So I don't know. I may have to end up getting another radiator once this one breaks, which will just make me real happy to change that out again. Moving on, other things that happened in my very brief amount of brush hogging today. The pin that's supposed to go through here fell out. And so I stuck this bolt in here. It's not the right size. It's not really the right thing for it. But it got me moving again, and I don't even understand how that pin fell out. It was super long. It had a big hitch pin on it out here where it couldn't just come off, and it did. And then, on top of that, I lost another linch pin. This one I stole off of another piece of equipment, but it disappeared, which is why this arm is now loose. Also, I just barely backed into something and bumped it. Now, you can't blame me for that because the brakes don't work on this tractor, but I broke this weld down here, and then this was already bent over from when it came loose the other day. Oh, and it's even lost its lock nut off of there. That's great too, because I had a jam nut like I have over here. See how there's two nuts on that one? And this one, there's only one on. So my jam nut fell off too. That's great. So what I need to do now, I'm going to take this entire assembly loose. I've never liked how the 3-point hitch on this is in two pieces. This is one piece that bolts on, comes up here, and this over here is another piece that bolts on, goes down there. And it's always been flopping loose, and that's why those are bent down there. And that's why this one bent so much that it actually broke that weld right there. So I'm going to guss it and triangulate everything, make things better. And I'm going to, frankly, take these two pieces and weld them together because I'm tired of it. They flop around independently from each other. And this whole thing's a joke. So brush hog has to come off again and go into the shop for welding. I did change the oil on it last night. That's good at least. The engine runs good. So I've got that much. But fix a few things to just tear up a bunch more stuff. So I don't know if I'm ever going to get this place brush hogged or not. So, late start today, but finally getting started working on the brush hog and repairing it. Here's the issues. As we documented the other day, this weld broke. I took a sledge and bashed this. It bent back a little bit straighter, but it's not perfect yet, as you can see. And of course the other side's bent. And then also, there's this mysterious mark here. Now what is this? That is where the drive shaft that comes out of the gearbox there hits this. Now that should never happen, but why does it happen here? Well, the tractor that I'm using is a Ford 2M, and it has dead hydraulics on it. It doesn't have live hydraulics. And basically the difference there is live hydraulics you can operate separately from the raising and lowering of the unit. You can actually lock the unit in place so that your hydraulics aren't raising or lowering all the time, and then still have the PTO going. In the case of a Ford 2N or a Ford 9N, you can't do that. Your hydraulics are always active whenever the PTO is active. So basically, anytime that input shaft is spinning, this whole thing can be raising or lowering. And that's why you actually see this silver chain back here. This is actually a limiter chain that I installed so that it can only lower so much. And so I leave my hydraulics in a low position, and that spins, and we brush hog, and everything's fine, and the brush hog stays down on the ground like it's supposed to. But what can happen when you're mowing around trees and stuff is a tree can, like a limb off a tree, can hit that lever that controls your raising and lowering of your hydraulics, and you may not see it. And then you start hearing a weird sort of clicking noise, which is actually your drive shaft hitting that brace that I added. So I've done a few simple things to the tractor, I'll show you later, that are locking the hydraulics so that it can't come up now. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to cut this piece out entirely, which is not going to fix the problem. It could still be hit. You know, just hit here instead of up here. But what I am going to do when I weld this piece back in, or a similar piece to it, I'm going to make a great big notch here, and I'm actually going to weld it all the way down to the deck so that that's acting like one big strong beam there. Now, why are these ends bent? Well, to tell you the truth, that was bent when I got the damn brush hog. And those are always going to be bent. And I'll tell you why. Because, and if you hear a little frustration in my voice, there is some frustration. This is stupid. This is not how you build things. And honestly, I should have fixed this a long time ago. So part of this failure is on me. This is what one would call a single shear mounting. And what single shear is it's where you have one piece of metal, basically, like you have here, and there is another piece they welded on here to try and kind of guss it up to where it wouldn't bend. But that's not going to do anything where that is, obviously, because this is bent. Well, when you mount things single shear, you're doing this. You bolt through and you bolt the other piece here. And what does that do? That just rocks back and forth like that because it's got nothing holding it out here. Anytime you want to mount something that's heavy duty, you always mount it double shear. Shock absorbers on cars, things like this, anything that's going to take any kind of load, you always mount double shear. Now, what does double shear mean? Double shear means that there would be a second piece of metal right here where my fingers are, and that would hold that and be welded in there. And now, instead of, just twisting and bending this off, you're actually trying to pull two pieces off of here. And even when you get into a situation where this is loaded unevenly, where it could bend like that, you're trying to bend two pieces instead of one. This also should have gussets. It should be triangulated back into this so that it can't friggin' bend. The idiots that made this thing didn't do that. So that's what we're primarily correcting today, because I had bent these two so badly that the brush hog was going along like this behind the tractor. It was literally tracking sideways. So that's our main thing. Fix this bar, modify this bar, but then also do a lot of gusset work and everything and get these all mounted where they're double shear and they're not going to come loose. The other thing is this stupid 3-point hitch setup on this thing, and I talked about this a little bit in my video last night, but this is two pieces, it flops around, it's wimbly wombly. I'm going to weld this up to where it's actually a proper 3-point hitch, and so it can't just flop like it is right now. I mean, this thing's like linguine. So that's my job for the day. Okay. I heated these with the torch and then beat them with the sledgehammer, and now they're kind of straight, which is good enough for what we're doing here. It occurs to me the last time I really worked on and modified this brush hog, I had a pretty lady talking to me. Oh well. Okay, there's fabrication and then there's fabrication. So this brush hog uses these super big bolts to attach the front. In the last video we talked about how they mounted that single shear and it wasn't right. But the problem is as I was going along, one of these bolts fell out, and this is the only one I have. Now I have some other bolts that are this size, but they're super short. And I even have some other bolts this size that are super long. Strangely enough, the bolts that bolt on the front of a brush hog also bolt a Pontiac Firebird subframe to the body. So I have those, but they're way too long. And they're kind of like this bolt that I just stumbled upon that was just sitting here on my counter. I can't remember what it was for, but given the little bit of red paint, I know this was off of the tractor, Mary as I refer to her. But the problem is this bolt has been beheaded There's no head on the bolt anymore. See, there's the hex head that's supposed to be on there. But I can fix that. I can take a nut, drill the threads out of it, slip it onto the end of this bolt, and weld it together and essentially make this bolt out of what's left of this bolt. So that's good. But yet again, that's one of those things that a lot of shops wouldn't do. Another thing that pretty much no shop does, here's a drill bit. And this is a cheap, crappy drill bit. But it's dull. And if you know what you're doing, you can actually take one of these in a bench grinder and sharpen them yourself. Yet again, something very few people know how to do. Luckily enough, I get that skill from my granddad. Strangely enough, never met the man. He passed away before I was born, but I can sharpen drill bits. So that's a useful skill, and I would say to anybody, if you're ever in your shop and you've got a dull drill bit, don't be shy. Take it to the grinder and see if you can sharpen it, because you probably can, and it's, you know, freehand doing it. It just kind of look at the angle and figure it out. And, you know, if your drill bit's dull and ruined, you're not going to do it any harm trying to take it to the grinder and sharpen it yourself. So give it a go, as they say. Okay, so making a bolt, not quite as simple as you might think it would be. So here I've got the bolt clamped in my vise. I've got it set at the length I want it to be. And this is the key here. Notice this beveled edge here. And if you notice on the bolt itself, I don't know if you can see that on camera. There we go. You can see another beveled edge. That is basically like a trough for the weld to go. And so that weld is going to come in here molten, super hot, burn its way to both of these pieces, and that will actually attach everything. You know, it's just like, it's the same thing as using glue. You know, whenever you glue something, you want to rough it up so that that glue has a surface to go into. And here what I'm doing is I'm just giving that weld absolutely as much surface as I possibly can to hold on to this whole thing. The other thing is, my welder is going to be turned up to the maximum setting on this. Now, I only have a little 110 volt welder. You know, most of the really good welders are 220 volts. I don't have that luxury here in my small little shop. But my little welder over here, might as well show it on video. That little welder has worked for me a long time and done a great job. And I guarantee you, when I take that and burn it in hard and send it straight to hell, that'll hold and that'll work. Okay, so we're finally on our way to our double shear modification. Remember, this is single shear and the bolt just goes on, it wallows around until it breaks stuff. Over here, now we're modifying to our double shear. I've got my single shear here, and I've got my second shear point here, and I've got the bolt threaded through it. Got it set up where I know it screws in and out real easy. And what I've done here, what I wanted to talk about is it's really important to get your setup correctly when you're welding something like this. I needed to find an appropriate shim to go in here to make sure that this gap was correct so that this piece would actually fit in there. Now, normally I like to fit things up really tight, but in this case I fit this up loose where it actually can flop pretty good in there, because the whole front of this thing is a wimbly-wombly mess. If they'd have made it right from the factory and made it beef, we wouldn't have this issue. But since they didn't do what they needed to do at the factory, well, I have to come in and clean up for them. So clamped it really good here, got it positioned where the bolt is working in the hole and everything, just like it should be, and then laid down a bead of weld. We're not done. I'm going to unbolt all this stuff and I'm going to weld. This is one of those heavy-duty applications where the more weld, the better. So I'll do that, and then we'll get started on the other side and hopefully have this thing done at some point. It's brush hog time again. Brush hog time's always a fun time, except when it's not. So a few years ago I went through this brush hog, braced it up, did a lot of work to it, because it was really, the whole thing was kind of flopping in the wind. You could twist it back and forth. And so I added this X brace in here, which helped a lot with rigidity, and then I added this cross brace here which we notice has a clearance problem to the drive shaft sometimes. Now technically that should never happen, but this tractor does not have what is known as live hydraulics on it. It has dead hydraulics, which means anytime your PTO is on, your hydraulics are on, which basically means anytime you've got power going into that gearbox and the blade's spinning under here, your hydraulics are always trying to go up or down, which is actually why we have this limiter chain here. It doesn't allow the hydraulics to go down so far that this thing's just digging in the dirt. Now the problem is, as you're driving along, that hydraulic lever can get bumped on the tractor and get pulled by like a tree branch into the up position, and then this whole thing raises, and by the time you start hearing the noise, this damage has already happened. This weld over here is actually broken due to that. What I think I'm going to do, now that I've added these extra pieces out here to hold things straight, I think I'm just going to cut this bar out completely. I don't think it needs to be here. This is a substantial thick piece down here. All I think this is doing is just causing clearance issues. So I think I'm just going to cut it out and be done with it. And then there's some modifications I'm going to do to the tractor, to the height lever handle, to make it where I can actually lock it when I'm out working, to where it won't move, and even if a tree branch grabs it, it won't start lifting this thing up. Because sooner or later that's going to happen, and I'm just going to break the drive shaft in half or bend it really badly or cause some other really horrible catastrophic failure. As far as the top of this hitch, I would really like to straighten this out, but this is like 1/2 inch thick steel. I don't have anything that's going to straighten that back out. The hitch is bent. If you can see, that pin's going off that way, that pin's going off real bad that way, and then these pins don't want to line up right, but it's good enough that it'll go together. And here's the truth: this brush hog has not seen the last of its abusive work. So, you know, at some point I have to stop and consider, do I want to make something perfect and show quality, or do I want to get it good enough that it works for now? And then, you know, maybe later we can reassess and look and say, well, you know, maybe we should alter this, or maybe we can make it better. But I think for now, I just need to get this thing the heck out of my shop. Okay. So this is one of those times where we have a little project that takes us way too long. It seems like it should be a small, quick adjustment, and then it turns into something that's not such a quick adjustment. I have a stabilizer bar on the back of this tractor, and I want to make it to where it'll work with the brush hog. And basically that stabilizer bar keeps my 3-point hitch from wobbling back and forth like that. Factory, the 2N tractors had those on them. In fact, all the in-series tractors did. And they would kind of get worn, and people would just take them off, and then all their attachments would go like this behind the tractor. And I don't want that. So I made a special arm that works as a stabilizer bar now, but only some of my attachments work with it. And the reason why is that arm has a flaw. It makes this mounting point, or the one on the opposite side, need to be wider. Basically, between here and here, I need more space to stack that extra rod in. Well, this is the pin from the other side, and as you can see, I've ground this part of it right here off so that I can essentially move this hole out so that I have more room for that extra control rod to go back here. But now, how do I make a new stop for it so that it doesn't just slip back out of that hole that way? Well, luckily enough, I had an old nut laying around, and I've drilled the threads out of it. The reason why I drilled the threads out of it is the threads don't go all the way to where I need it to be. I need it to go right up next to the end of that lighter spot there. So what I did is I took this nut, I drilled the threads out of it, and see, I've drilled holes in the sides of it. Well, this is where our good friend plug welding comes in again. What I'll do is I'll slip this up on the bolt to where I want it, and then I'll plug weld through there, and that should lock this into place on there, and then I can just bolt it back on with the original nut, and we'll be good to go. Now the problem is, this has taken me probably about 2 hours to do, because I didn't really have the right tooling to drill that out. So that's where you get into those frustrating, you know, this should have took 45 minutes, here we are 2 hours later, kind of things that just hold you up. Okay, so even though this was frustrating and it took a long time, in the end it turned out extremely well, and I got the exact result I wanted. Basically what happened, and I don't want to get too close to this because it's still very hot right now, I got this nut to where it would just press up on there, meaning it was a tight fit. And so I was able to use the shot press over here, this thing right there, and I was able to press this nut on to exactly the distance I wanted it to be. And then since it was pressed on there, it would just stay there while I welded it. And so I didn't have to do any of this positioning yourself crazy or holding your mouth just right while you're trying to weld it. But something that's important to notice this sleeve that's up on here. Now that's just sitting on there. I don't want to grab it with my hands, but it's sitting on there loose. And what it's doing is it's covering up the threads so that when I welded this, I didn't get weld spatter all over my threads and have to fix my threads. It's something you always want to be mindful of when you're welding around, is where's the spatter going to go and what's it going to mess up. Particularly when you're around tanks filled with gasoline, you got to be real careful of it then. Okay, so one of the primary reasons I brought this brush hog back here for service anyways was that this bolt right here had left the building. It had fell out. The original way they had this together, as you may remember, we just had the one little shear mount here. We had it mounted single shear. We talked about that earlier. So now I've got it double shear mounted. And what I did is I threaded this piece. So there's actually threads in here. And it actually, like if I look at this side, I don't have the bolt in there right now. But if I was to take the bolt like this, see how it threads in there? There's actually threads in this hole now. That's great, because what that enables me to do is lock these bolts into place. Now, there's lots of different ways of locking bolts into place, and there's lots of really good ways of doing it too. But sometimes you have to ramp things up a lot, and a lot of times in this kind of situation, I'd use under the head of the bolt here what's called a lock washer, or I would use this, which I was holding in my hands earlier. This is Loctite. I particularly like this type of Loctite because it's in a stick form. Usually it's in a liquid form, and I find that it dries out and runs all over the place. This is harder to find. Usually I can't find it in the store. I have to find it online. But this is a Loctite stick. If you've never used it, it works kind of like lipstick, really, except I wouldn't use Loctite as lipstick. That's a really bad idea. Don't do that. Anyway, but this, you just put it on the threads of the bolt. You apply it a lot like you would apply lipstick. And not that I know that much about applying lipstick, people. I just want to make that clear. But anyway, you'd apply this on the threads, and you'd screw on the nut. And it's what's called an anaerobic sealer, which basically, when it doesn't have oxygen, that's when it hardens. And so if you think about it, when these threads press up against each other, there's no oxygen between them. It acts like glue and holds your bolt in there. On an application this heavy duty, I really don't think Loctite's going to cut it. Don't get me wrong, this is a great product. I love this product. But even the people at Loctite would tell you it is not going to hold something like this in necessarily this situation. So what do we turn to? How do we hold this bolt in here? Like right now it's threaded in here tight and I can't loosen it with my fingers. But I guarantee you we get around out there in the field bashing this thing around, brush hogging, running over tree stumps and all this, and that'll vibrate loose. Here is your kind of foolproof method. This is not an official jam nut, but I'm going to use it as a jam nut. And all a jam nut is basically this right here. See how these two nuts are screwed together, right? Well, if I took and tightened these both down against each other, they'd bind on this thread, and they'd make it where this bolt is almost impossible to unscrew. The great thing about a jam nut is you can tighten it down as tight as you want and get a hold as strong as you want. And even more so, if I was really going to get worried about it, and in fact, if I see one of these bolts coming loose again, I'll come along, I'll put a lock washer under here and put a jam nut on there, and then it's not going anywhere. And then if it moves again after that, I'll put a lock washer under here, a jam nut on here, and I'll Loctite it, and then it's guaranteed to go nowhere. The other thing I love about a jam nut is you can take it, spin it right on there by hand, spins on nice and easy, tighten it down with a wrench real tight, and it's not going to go anywhere. But when you need to take it apart, all you do is take that jam nut loose and everything unthreads real quick and easy because the threads are nice and in good shape. So jam nuts rule. A true jam nut, just so you know, I was going to bring an example out, but I forgot. A true jam nut will actually be like that thickness as opposed to like the full thickness of the nut. They'll be about a half a nut thickness. And the only reason why is they're not really holding any load. They're just holding the threads together. So they don't need to be full thickness. And a lot of times it's nice to kind of have a slimmer nut that fits in tighter spaces. Here we're dealing with wide open spaces, and I'm just using what I had, and I thought these were nice with this big washer head on them. It'd give them a little bit more surface area, a little bit more bite, and a little bit more hold. The other thing I like about using a jam nut in this application is, you know, I was talking about threading this piece of metal, and you might look at that and say, well, you know, that's kind of thin for a bolt thread this big to hold. You know, like basically you could rip this bolt out. Well, I put this big old jam nut on here. Now I have to rip that whole jam nut through this 3/8 inch piece of steel to get this bolt to come out. I don't think that's going anywhere. I don't know about you all, but I'm pretty sure that ain't going anywhere. So this will be a lot better. It won't bend like it was doing, and it should hold up a lot nicer, and I shouldn't be losing these freaking bolts. And that's another thing. These are huge bolts, and there's ways to get bolts bulk online cheap, and maybe I'll show that in a future video. But a bolt this size, you're just going to pay for it. That's like a $1 bolt, which for me is expensive. A bolt costing more than $1, that's an expensive bolt. So I don't want to lose these again. I really don't want to have to go and buy more. So this is my solution, and I think it should hold up. Okay, so here's the deal. I have an alignment issue because these two pieces are so bent that these two holes should be parallel to each other and like straight in line with each other from side to side, but they're not. This one's like bent forward and that one's bent back to where these holes don't line up like they should. But there's this pin that kind of holds everything together here and holds that chain on down there. So what I've done, and this is kind of crummy, but I've turned this down in the lathe, if the camera will focus, turned this down in the lathe so there's a little bit smaller diameter here, so when I put this in, it gives me a little bit more wiggle room, and hopefully that'll make it where I can position it where this top pin, which needs to come in and out easily to change implements, hopefully that'll make that where I can line that up. So I'm going to bolt it together here and give it a test. Okay, so after turning this bolt down, put it all together, it's still crooked, but I don't mind it being crooked. It's old and bent anyway. This brush hog, this is not meant to do like a nice mow. It's meant to knock rough stuff down. I've even got a super heavy duty gearbox on it to knock heavy stuff down. So this is good enough for who it's for. It's not binding in there, so that's good. So really just a few more things here to finish assembly and we can get this out of the damn shop. Well, that's a wrap on this mess. It's ready to be drug out of the shop and hooked back up to the tractor. So I guess that'll be next. So this is what I've been working on today, and this is kind of the final adjustment to getting this tractor back out and ready to go. So when brush hogging, what happens a lot of times, this is your height control lever right here. You know, you push it down and your hydraulics go down. Whatever's back here, whatever implement you got is going to go down. You pull this up and whatever implement you've got is going to go up, hopefully, if the hydraulics are working. Now the problem we've talked about with that brush hog is the drive shaft will bind when these hydraulics go up. It's not meant to be lifted up. It's meant to stay on the ground. But what'll happen is, as you're mowing along out here in the rough, a branch will come along, grab this lever and pull it up. And you won't know it until you hear the clicking sound of that drive shaft grinding against the brush hog, which eventually will break the drive shaft in half, and then there's going to be flying debris, and it's just dangerous. So what I've added here is this little knob. This is a locking knob. So what you can do is position this lever where you want it, tighten it down and lock it, and now that sucker's not moving anywhere. And then just for normal use, you just wind that dude back out, and then you've got your regular hydraulics working as normal. Now, the reason I have to add that on this tractor is this is a tractor that has what is known as dead hydraulics, meaning that whenever your PTO is turning, and this is your PTO right here, whenever that output is turning, the hydraulics are always trying to go up or down. When these tractors were originally made, the idea was that you could put that height lever in a neutral position and that the hydraulics would sort of stay in the same spot. In reality, everybody that has these tractors know that that doesn't work. The hydraulics just don't do that. And so what you do is you run what's called a limiter chain on your brush hog. And here are the pins that I've added for a limiter chain to come down. When we hook up the brush hog, you'll get to see that, and it'll make a lot more sense. Now, if this was like a couple of years later tractor, a Ford 8N, an 8N has a separate lever that actually locks the hydraulics to where that lever doesn't do anything anymore, and then the PTO can spin and your hydraulics just stay in one spot. This tractor doesn't have that feature, so that's why I added this on here as a safety. So looks like that'll work out really well. I made it really low profile so that branches and stuff wouldn't get at it. And I like that, I always like when I make something that kind of matches the machine, and that kind of looks like antique sort of knob there. Now, what is that knob actually made out of? That's an old lawnmower jack shaft, or well, really the stub off an old lawnmower jack shaft. So you can always recycle stuff, and that's handy. So, it's finally done. We've got it all put back together. Now you may notice, those that are savvy with brush hogs, yes, I've got the front of this brush hog way too high. And that's where these elusive limiter chains that I keep talking about in my videos on this tractor, the limiter chains. So here they are. And what this does is it does not allow this brush hog to drop down into the ground, because this thing will literally dig a hole. So that's where the dead hydraulics come in, because like I was saying earlier, these are always trying to raise or lower. And so what you do is you take your hydraulics and you take your control lever, and as you can see, that control lever, I don't know if you can really see it from there, but I'll come around here, it's in a down position right now. And that's where this thumb screw, or whatever you want to call it, lock nut, however you want to call this thing, that's where that comes in, that I added the other day. That locks this so that it can't get hit by a branch and be put in the up position. And if you think about that, if this brush hog was to come up, here's the drive shaft that I've been talking about. If it comes up, this drive shaft goes up at an angle like this all moves up, and it comes up and hits this drive shaft, which we absolutely don't want to have happen. That's just bad news. Now, I do need to adjust that limiter chain over there. We've got the limiter chain here on this side, and it's about right, I think, because I've got, you can see that I'm pretty much on the ground over here, maybe a little high at the front, but not too bad. But that side, now that I've done all the work I've done to this brush hog, I don't know what changed, but that side's too high now, so I can just loosen that up by one length of chain, and it should balance everything back out nicely. And so that's it for this build so far. So good. You know, we've been brush hogging, we got a nice path here cut, and we finally made it to the great outdoors. So here we are. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and we'll see you next time.